To get started, we're going to want to install two things. We're going to want to install the bicep.exe, so the command line tool itself, and also the v6 file, so the Visual Studio extension file. To get both of these, you're going to open a browser and go to github.com. So github.com/Azure/bicep. Hit enter. And on the right hand side, you should see some releases. Click on one of those, the latest one. And here we can see that we've got some files here. For Windows, we've actually got two options. We've got a setup option and we've just got the exe itself. If you go with the exe itself, you're going to have an additional step of adding that to the path. So I'm just going to go with the setup. So I'm going to download that. And I'm also going to download this VSIX, this v6 file. With the setup, because it's not signed, we see this warning here. I'm going to ignore that by hitting keep. And I'm going to go to show more and keep anyway. And we see that we've got both of the files. So I'm going to hit the setup file first. It's going to ask me that it's an unrecognized app because it's new. Again, I'm just going to hit run anyway. Accept everything. Perfect. Now to install this VSIX file, you're going to open up VS Code. And if you go to the building blocks here, which is the extensions, and if we hit the three ellipses, there's an option to install from v6. And we see here, I'm in my downloads folder, I can see it there. So I'm going to install that. The extension itself is just called Bicep. So once it installs, you should see it in this list. Here we go, so it's completed. So if I scroll down, well, if I refresh and scroll down, if I type Bicep now, I should see it. There we go. To verify that Bicep is installed, you can always open up a Windows terminal. I'm going to open Windows Terminal Preview. And if I type Bicep --help, we should see that it's installed. If not, then you're going to have to add it to your path, especially if you go with just downloading the .exe file. Now that we have Bicep installed, we're going to create a project so we can work. So I'm going to open up my VS Code and I'm going to go open folder and I'm going to put it into my repositories folder, create a new folder. I'm going to call it something just like Bicep Demo. And I'm going to select that. Now you see we've got an empty folder. All we need is a .bicep file. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it main.bicep. With just this file, we can actually run Bicep. So I'm going to minimize this and I'm going to change the directory into the folder I've just created. So that was repositories and Bicep Demo. And to build it, all we need to run is bicep build main.bicep. And we see that's successful. So if I look back at my VS Code now, we should see a new file. So it's actually generated a empty ARM template, so the minimum viable template. Now that we have our first Bicep file, let's put something in it. We're going to create our first resource. So the way it works is you start off with the keyword of resource. And then you have the name of the resource within the Bicep file. So this could be whatever you like. I'm going to create a storage account. So I'm just going to go with STG. And the next is the type. So this is a Microsoft.storage. Storage accounts. And now we reference the API version. So I'm going to go with the one that I know is 2019-06. 01 and then equals open curly brace, make some space. So now we need to start giving it some details. So we're going to give it the name of the storage account. This needs to be unique, so I'm going to go with my alias and some random stuff, blah blah blah. Next we need a location. and I'm going to go with the closest one that is good, which is West Europe. Sorry, UK South. Kind, so it is a storage account type. And the SKU, the SKU. So open curly brace, close curly brace. And the name of the SKU is, let's do standard LRS. Underscore LRS. There we go. So that should be enough to create a storage account. Now that we have the code for the storage account, let's see what it actually creates. If you remember, we've just got an empty template here, but if we run Bicep again, so I'm going to press up on my terminal, we should see an update to this file. As you can see, it's added the storage account. So now that we've done that, let's do our first refactor. Bicep supports parameters, so we're going to start using those here. So let's refactor this a little bit. So I'm going to make some space, and I'm going to put my parameters at the top. And I'm going to make the location to be a parameter. So it's the name of the parameter and then the type. So this is a string. And that's going to be equal to West Europe. There we go. And the next one, let's make the name of the storage account. So let's do param again, and we're going to call it name. And it's also a string. I'm going to make that equal to, and I'm not going to type that this time. I'm just going to copy and paste. So now to use these parameters in the code it couldn't be any more simple. So you just type the name of the parameter. So in this instance, name is name. And location is location. Okay, I'm going to save that. So as you can see, there are no parameters here, but when I run bicep build main bicep, we should see we now have the two parameters there. So that's doing parameters, pretty straightforward. We can also add variables for storing values or complex expressions, and we can also emit outputs that can be passed to a script or another template. It's pretty straightforward to do that, so let's do that here. So we're going to do another refactor. So we're going to create a variable, and the keyword for that is var for variable, and let's do storage SKU. I'm going to camel case that, and I am going to copy and paste. There we go. To reference a variable is the very same as referencing a parameter, and you just put in the name of the variable. So storage SKU, like that. And finally, if we want to do an output, the keyword is output, and we're going to output the ID of the storage account. So let's do storage ID, and it's a string output. And we're going to make that equal to the name of the resource in Bicep, which is this stg.id. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to do another run of Bicep. And if I check here, we should see outputs and variables. We see we've got the variable and we've got the output. To really test if this works, we're going to actually deploy it. And to deploy it is we deploy the JSON file. So it's just a regular ARM template deployment. We don't actually deploy the Bicep code. So to do that, let's build it one more time just to make sure. So again, Bicep build main.bicep. So we know we're up to date. Now let's create a resource group. So make sure that you're logged in and you've got the correct subscription. And I'm going to do new AZ resource group. And I'm going to do dash name. Let's do Bicep demo dash RG, and then location. Again, I'm going to go with West Europe. Cool. Now we've got somewhere to deploy to. Now let's do the deployment of the template. So new AZ resource group deployment template file. There we go. main.json. Remember, it's the JSON we're deploying, not the bicep, as they're the same as each other. And resource group name, and I did bicep demo -rg. There we go. So with any luck, in a couple of seconds, we should have a storage account. And we can see that's a success. And we can also see the output that we just added a few seconds ago. Let's do one more refactor. And instead of forcing our users to generate a unique name for the storage account name, let's use an expression to do that for them. So we're going to refactor this again a little bit more. So we've got our location parameter here, and we've got a parameter for name, but I'm going to make this automatic. So I'm going to get rid of that. And we see that it's referencing now something that doesn't exist. So we've got some at least rudimentary IntelliSense and language support within the extension. So to do this, I'm going to use the unique string function. So instead of name, I'm going to go unique string. We can see I've got the IntelliSense there again. And it's a function, so we've got to do that. And we're going to make a unique string from the resource group ID. So let's do that. And resource group.id is a function as well. Or resource group there, like this. So if we save that now, when we deploy this, it should generate its own name. So once more, I'm going to do bicep build. And I'm going to do a deployment again. Now that the deployment is complete, let's have a look. So I'm going to find my resource group and refresh the page. It would certainly help if I was in the correct directory. So if I close that down, if I look at resource groups, we see that we've got the bicep demo RG, and we've got 2 storage accounts. The reason for that is because I didn't reference a complete deployment. So this is the one that was originally deployed. As we can see, we've got this unique string that was generated from the expression within our bicep. The concat function, concatenate function rather, is one of the most commonly used ARM template functions. We can actually use string interpolation in Bicep, and it's a lot more simple and straightforward to do. So once again, we're going to refactor our code and start using some string interpolation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new parameter. So again, it's param, and I'm going to use name prefix, and it's a string, of course, and I'm going to initialize that as well, and I'm just going to call it stg to give my storage account a prefix. So how do I add this parameter concatenated with this unique string? It's really rather straightforward. So what we want to do is, first of all, we want to put it in quotes, and we want to concatenate with this syntax. So it's $ open curly brace, close curly brace, and then for the next one, again, it's $ open curly brace. This time we want to close it just before the quote, like this, right? And now we reference the name prefix. So simply it's just name prefix, like that. So we're concatenating name prefix, which is stg, and then we've got the unique string there. So let's quickly save this. And again, we want to build it again. So bicep build main bicep. And we want to deploy it like this. This time I want to make sure that we only have one storage account in the end, so we want to use the deployment mode complete. So that should remove the 2 storage accounts that we have and deploy this new one with the STG prefix. So now we see the deployment is complete. Let's go and have a quick look at it. So if I open up a browser again, we see when I refresh the page, these 2 should be gone. Yep, and we've got the STG prefix at the start. So that's how we do string concatenation or interpolation in Bicep. In Bicep, we can provide a value conditionally for a variable, a resource, or an output using the ternary operator, which is kind of like the if function within ARM templates. So what we could do is use that to pick the redundancy type. So let's give that a go. So to do it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new parameter, and I'm going to call it global redundancy. Well, if I could spell it, so R-E-D-U-N-D-A-N-S, yeah. I think that's spelled correctly. Okay, so this time it's going to be a Boolean. And we're going to initialize that to be true by default, right? So here is where we pick whether it's LRS or GRS, for instance. So we're not going to hard code that, we're going to use ternary. So I'm going to get rid of this. Like that. Maybe get rid of this extra space as well. So now under skew, we're going to use this ternary operator. So we're going to use this name, global redundancy, and the syntax is question mark, and we're going to standard GRS else standard LRS. So what that means is if global redundancy is true, we go with standard globally redundant storage, and if it's false, it's locally redundant storage. So it's a fairly elegant way of doing that. So I'm going to save that. Again, run Bicep, and I'm going to deploy. Again with a complete. Go for yes. Now that's deployed, let's have another look at our storage account. So we can see now it's actually got geo-redundant replication because a value is defaulted to true, which meant this rather than this. So that's how you use ternary operators. As we discussed earlier, the resource declaration includes a symbolic name. So this is this one here, STG, which is separate from the name of the resource that will be created. This is simply a reference to the resource within Bicep. So this is how we could differentiate this storage resource. If I had another one, I'd call it STG2, so we can tell them apart. And we're actually referencing it here, so we're doing the ID as an output. What might be useful as well is to do something like this, where we do output and we do computed name, and that'll be a string. And we want to know what because we're using a unique string here, so we want to actually know what the name of the storage account is. So that'll be stg.name. So now if I save that, again, as always, run Bicep. So if I do a template deployment again, we see that we've got a new output called computed name, and we see this is the actual name of the storage account. So it's quite useful. You can also output things like the API version and the type as well. In ARM templates, we use the reference function to retrieve the runtime properties that only exist after a resource has been created. In a storage account, the primary endpoints property is one of those. So let's add another output to reference this runtime property. So if we go back into our Bicep file, and we want to define another output. And this time we're going to call it blob endpoint. And it's a type string. And we're going to equal, and we're going to reference stg.properties because we're referencing a property. And its primary endpoints, I believe, .blob. So if I save that, and again if we run Bicep, and deployment again, we can see that we now have the blob endpoint in our outputs. In ARM templates today, we must manually specify resource dependencies with the depends on property. If we want to create something like a blob container for a storage account, we need to make sure that the storage account gets created first. The good thing about Bicep is that if you reference any property of the resource via its symbolic name, so the STG name, this automatically adds the depends on property. So let's see that in action now. So go back into our file. We want to add a second resource, and we're going to call it blob. And it is a Microsoft.storage. And it is a storage accounts. And it's blob services. And containers. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? So now we reference the API version. So again, it's 2019-06-01. And we do equals, open curly brace, close curly brace. And we want to give it a name. So we're going to do some concatenation again, or interpolation. So we're going to do $, open curly brace, close curly brace, stg.name, and outside of the curly brace then we're going to do /defaults/logs, and that is it. So if I save that, if I run Bicep once more, we should see the depends on property has been added. There we go. So it's been added because we are referencing this here. So I'm going to run that once more. Yes. Now that's been deployed, let's have another quick look at our storage account. So I'm going to refresh, and if I scroll down to blob containers, we see that we've created a logs container.